Welcome to the Let Go and Be Free podcast, a podcast for those who grew up in an alcoholic or dysfunctional family. I'm your host, Ron Vitale, author of the Let Go and Be Free 100 Daily Reflections for Adult Children of Alcoholics series. If you'd like to learn more, feel free to visit letgoandbefree.com. And with that, let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Let Go and Be Free podcast. I'm your host, Ron, and for this week, we are going to go over and review step 10 of the 12 steps of adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families with the World Service Organization, or as I like to abbreviate, ACOA, or you may see the abbreviation as ACA. So if you've been following along with the other episodes in which I break down the previous steps, 1 through 9, number 9 was the complicated one of making direct amends to such people in your life, like anyone that you have harmed. And we had talked about making amends to yourself and making time for that to make certain that you also added yourself to the list. I know that could be seen as controversial. Some ACOA groups or ACA groups recommend that you don't put yourself first. I respectfully disagree with that. I think often those of us that grew up in a alcoholic family or where there was dysfunction, addiction, and such, we typically put our needs last. And I do think that it's important that part of the self-reflection of the 12 steps is how, did you hurt yourself? Like, when did you allow your own boundaries to be weak? Meaning you took care of other people and didn't take care of yourself. So that was the last episode, episode 9. And again, if you haven't gone through the previous episodes, I highly recommend that you go back and re-listen to those other episodes. They're very helpful to give you a sense of grounding of where you have been through the process of the 12 steps. Where are you now? What have you learned? What might you look at from a different perspective, where you may have initially looked at something and been like, whoa, I don't know what this is. I don't agree with this. Maybe you're a little bit more open, to some of the steps. And again, if you're new to this podcast and you're going through the 12 steps, if you see the word God in some of the steps, just remove it, and some people would say, well, it says God. And what I'm saying is the importance of learning the toolkit and the framework that are the 12 steps, in my personal opinion, it encompasses people who believe in God, who don't believe in God, who maybe aren't sure. There's a lot of good that's in there, and if the word God bothers you, just simply remove it, and you could easily read the step without thinking of a higher power or, there's some supreme being that's going to save you. That's not the purpose of the steps. There's a lot of other things that you can learn, skills about self-reflection and the importance of taking care of yourself, and also how to interact healthfully with other people. So with that said, I am going to read step 10 and we will review it. So for step 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. So again, I'll go through and read that again nice and slow. Continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. This is a difficult step because, again, step 4, again, I'll read that one if you don't remember that one, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. So basically, through the process of the 12 steps, there are different checkpoints in which you look at your behavior and say, have I been a good person to myself, to others, the world, my family? What exactly does that mean? And then through the course of the rest of the steps, you get to step 10, and it says continued to take that personal inventory, and when you were wrong, promptly admitted it. So again, you're going through the steps, and if you've made, if you've argued with people, if you've injured people in your disagreements with them, with steps 8 and 9, you've gone through that process of making amends. And now moving forward, step 10 is the continue reflection. in which you then need to say, as I'm going through about my day, am I being, a good person to myself, to the world, to my neighbors, to my family, to my friends, to my coworkers? And I will simply stop there and saying, what exactly is that? You know, how do you know when you're wrong? And that might seem like a strange question, but in behaviors that you may have used as coping mechanisms in the past, you need to be a little bit more aware of how you're going around about, your interactions with people. So, for example, if you were used to manipulating people to get your way, well, you might look at that and be like, hey, you know what? I've been going through these steps and I've apologized to people because of the harm that I've done them, because maybe I lied to them and manipulated them, or, or whatever. Again, I'm just using an example. Moving forward, you might have to be very brutally honest with yourself and be like, you know what? Certain behaviors, you know, pretending that you don't see something or hear something, knowing that somebody else is going to pick up, let's say, the slack on the home front. Well, that's not really a really nice or mature thing to do. Whereas a discussion on, hey, I'm doing these things around the house, you're doing X things around the house, I really need help with something, would be a more mature way to go about it. Whereas a coping mechanism, that a dysfunctional behavior that you might have had is like ignore it, ignore a problem, let something fester, repress it, denial, that type of thing. So as you're going through and doing that personal inventory, you might hit this hard wall of truth where you might say, wait a minute, there are certain behaviors that I go through anytime I'm in a problem, and they have got me through in the past, but they haven't necessarily been healthy on building, a strong, lasting, and healthy relationship with someone. And again, a relationship could be with a coworker. For example, if you're at work and you keep shouldering the work, and you're like, yes, I'll take on this, I'll take on that, I'll stay late, I'll come in the extra weekend, this, that, the whole thing. And inside, you're ready to blow because you're so frustrated and angry that you keep getting taken advantage of. And I use that and I emphasize that on purpose. And then let's say you go home and then your spouse, I don't know, forgot to get milk on the way home, and you blow up at your spouse because of that. Well, are you really that angry at your spouse, or have you deflected your anger in a safe way, whereas for whatever reason you're afraid of addressing conflict on the work front and saying to your coworker or your boss, look, I need help here. I can't keep volunteering, to stay late or to do this extra project, blah, 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 blah. That personal inventory and admitting when you're wrong could be something which you may not have seen in the past before. That's the purpose of these steps, is to kind of go through and learn about what is healthy, behaviors, what are dysfunctional behaviors. And going through the ACOA steps and learning that is something that over time you're going to be able to put that together and say, okay, I have a better understanding now of what is going to work for me moving forward in my life, instead of following the behaviors that maybe you saw that your parents did. Maybe your one of your parents escaped through getting high or drinking or whatever, instead of confronting their own boss or dealing with their own problems and, denying things and repressing things. Again, I'm just using examples, but this is something in which this, moral inventory, to this personal inventory, looking at that and looking at yourself and how you're interacting with the people around you, and then also interacting with yourself. This is where I think it's a really good point that you can add in those couple set of questions of, as you're doing that personal inventory, is this healthy for me? You could sit there and then have a better understanding by saying, oh, wait a minute, this isn't healthy if I work all the time, if I'm always volunteering to do work, if I'm always going to be the person that's going to step up for the holidays and I'm going to do all the cleaning and all the cooking and all the other work around that. And I'm going to take this all on because it's the thing to do and I just suffer through it. Like, there's times where it's important that you ask yourself these questions. Is it true? Is it true that if I don't go in and stay extra late at work, that the world's going to end? That my performance at work is going to be directly affected and I'll get fired. Like, when you ask yourself certain questions, you're going to get different answers when you have the clarity to be able to put things in perspective, where you might say, you know what? Maybe I had too much tunnel vision and I was too afraid, of standing up for myself, because I was afraid I was going to get fired or someone was going to disagree with me. I didn't want the center of attention to be on top of me, or whatever. So it's just something that I think is really important that we focus on, that we have a better understanding of what our weaknesses are, what our strengths are, and then also, where are our boundaries? A lot of times when you're asking yourself, is it true? Is this healthy for me? That's where you're kind of testing verbally the power of words being built around you, of these interpersonal relationships. You can't see me, but I'm kind of drawing this circle in the air around myself to kind of show that if you have a strong boundary, that boundary will allow you to say, you know what? I really need to sleep. I need extra sleep tonight. I can't go out and volunteer to help my church with this bake sale, that's going to run late. I'm not feeling well. It's okay to say no. And I think that's one of the things that it's not clear often when you grow up in a dysfunctional family or where there's addiction in the household, because you didn't have that sense of, your parents mirroring healthy behavior. You only learned their coping mechanisms to get through the life that they have. And you may have learned some of those. And basically now you're moving through life and you're just replicating that same behavior pattern. Using the 12 steps is a way to break that history, change the generational dysfunction, and then to give you the tools and the framework to be able to say, these words allow me to think in a different way. So when you're doing that personal inventory, it could be writing in a journal, and you're writing in your journal, let's say a couple times a week, about what's going on at work, what's going on in the household, starting to kind of process the feelings. If you don't like to write, then you might turn around and do a walk. And you're walking around and you're walking, through your neighborhood, and you're thinking in your head, no music, no phone, just walk and think. And then you might process like, well, wait a minute, I had this argument with my spouse, or this big project at work is really kind of pulling me down. Why is that? Am I taking on too much? Am I carving out enough time to help myself? Am I doing everything for everybody first and I'm putting myself last? What would happen if you were to say, you ask yourself the question, is this healthy for me? Or is it true if I don't do all this extra work or volunteer on the home front to do all these things that the world would fall? What would happen if you took more time for yourself? When you start asking yourself these questions, these neural pathways in your brain are going to open up different avenues of possibility. And I think that's the beauty of this. You see that there is hope, because your whole life you've been told this is how the way the world is, because that's what you saw mirrored in the relationships around you. When you start looking outside of yourself and then reflecting back inward and saying, wait a minute, why are these people happy and I'm not happy? And then you say, well, because I keep denying my own feelings. I keep repressing things. I keep running away, or I keep lashing out. I keep whatever your weaknesses are, whatever these coping mechanisms, whatever these dysfunctional behavior patterns that you learned in growing up, identifying them, naming them, writing them down, speaking about them, talking to a therapist about them is powerful, because then it gives you the next step of, how can I grow beyond that? Just think about that for a second. Basically, if you take the 12 steps and look at it very high level, they're just a set of rules to help you learn different behaviors that have not been so helpful for you in the past. They're a toolkit to help you to get to a better tomorrow. And so and I'm not going to say this is an equivalency, but like if you believe in the 10 Commandments, if you follow the 10 Commandments, they're going to help you to live a better life. Honor thy father and mother. You shall not kill. Like that kind of stuff. Like think about it. They're basically rules that will help you move forward in life. Again, if you're spiritual or not, I think we all can agree that killing people, your neighbor, is going to be a bad thing. And if you say to yourself, these 12 steps, how can they help me? How can they give me hope for a better tomorrow? The challenge is like when you're stuck in a certain situation, you can't even see that there is another way. Does that make sense? Think about that for a second. You might think you know what you know, but all of us are limited to our own experiences. That's why I think the beauty is to grow and be open to discussion, to other ideas, to question yourself, not all the time, but to say, is this healthy for me? And then drop in whatever the current situation is. So when I think about that, take that personal inventory, and when you're wrong, you admit it for step 10. I'd like to fold into that those boundary tests. Is it true? Is it healthy for me? And learning how to build up that internal dialogue with yourself takes time. One of the early episodes, I shared that my therapist had said, there's the three voices within us. You got the child voice, that we all grew up with. It says, I want the candy now. And then you got the parental voice that says, you can't have candy before dinner. And then you have the adult voice, which many of us did not see mirrored in our families growing up. The adult asks, is it healthy for you to have the candy before dinner? Is it true that candy before dinner is going to ruin your dinner? And that answer might change day to day. Maybe you're not going to have dinner till later, and you're asking this question at 4 PM, and you're going to eat at like 7. And you might say, well, if I have one tiny piece, maybe it's not going to be the end of the world. Or you might say, my sugar level's really high. I'm pre-diabetic, and maybe having that candy is not a good thing. I can't answer some of these questions for you. No one can. They're what you can do to help yourself when you do that moral, personal inventory. And I keep throwing in the word moral because I do think it's important that we do our best to be helpful in the world, not just selfishly around ourselves. One of the things that I look back at, and I wish I would have seen reflected more, in my own family upbringing, is the importance of service, of helping others, not just, yourself. And again, I want to be cautious. I'm not saying that you ignore your own needs or ignore your own family and go volunteer elsewhere and, try to be a savior or a martyr to help others. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying, though, is in the course of our lives, you'll see on the news, you'll see in your, local community, there's lots of suffering out there. There's people suffering in all walks of life. And I believe the importance of empathy and compassion and in being able to step up and to help others. I have been helped in the past by people. I like to pass it on and to help others. Now, I'm not saying I know all the right answers. I'm not saying that, volunteer because then you can assuage your own guilt. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying, though, is as you're going through, that personal inventory, you might ask yourself, what service have I been, to others in the world? And I ask that, of you just to reflect that many of us think that we're powerless to change things, whatever we're seeing in our society, in the government, in our community. And that's not true. Sometimes a simple act of kindness can go a long way. A simple act of empathy and understanding where somebody else is coming from can go a long way instead of, gossip, talking about somebody behind their back, trying to sabotage somebody, behind the scenes because you're angry at them, ignoring someone, making something more difficult for someone on purpose. There's a lot of ways that we could be petty. There's a lot of ways that we could be difficult with ourselves, where we're not giving ourselves, the honesty and the compassion that we need as we're going through and learning through the course of our lives. It's something that's really important, is understanding the healthy balance between, what are your needs and how can you thrive, and how can you be of assistance to others so that you can build community. If you only focus on yourself and don't focus on tendering your relationships, and your relationships are with your coworkers, with your family, with your friends, with your long distance friends or cousins, long distance family, but also with your community. I think often in today's world, many of us, are so tied to our phones that we're not spending the time and energy in the world around us, and having all come out of, the worst, knock on wood, of the pandemic, and looking at the quarantine that we'd spent together for all that time, and the difficulty, that many of us had in interacting with people due to high virus rates, in our communities, and people getting sick, and long COVID, and et cetera, et cetera. There has been a, kind of withdrawal into ourselves, which is good to have self-reflection. But if you're able to, if it's healthy for you, physically, and mentally, emotionally, psychologically, what would happen if when you did that personal inventory, you can say to yourself, how have I been of service, to others? I'm asking that in a way that might seem contradictory to the 12 steps, because the 12 steps typically focus, on you. And when you get to the 12th step, then it's a little bit more about sharing the message with others. Spoiler. And that's where I think planting the seed in step 10 and asking the question of what about the interaction that you have with your own community? How can you be of service? I think that's important when you get to step 12, when we discuss that in a couple weeks, because then you can reflect and say, can I volunteer at my local library? Can I volunteer through some program at work? How can I be of service to others? And you might say, well, no one ever helped me. No one ever, volunteered to make my life better. I've got this all on my shoulders. Why should I help somebody else? Well, go back through the steps, take a look, and maybe you might reflect differently on this after you've gone through, the steps for, months to a year. You might look at it from a different perspective of, think about if this is the first time that you're hearing about the steps, and if you've interacted with others who have gone through the 12-step program, you might say, I learned a lot through this. Maybe this is something that I can give back, to this community. And what would that mean? I don't know. Maybe you write a poem. Maybe you could give a donation, to your local ACA group. There's a lot of things that can be done. But what I'm saying is, when I say be of service, I think it's important to reflect and see how we can physically make a difference in a way that would be helpful to others. Not trying to be controlling, not trying to save the world, but how we can take small steps to be integral and connected with our community. Because the more that we have strong relationships with our families, with our friends, with our coworkers, and then with ourselves, that's where we find that healthy balance, and we're able to live in a way where we will thrive, rather than using coping mechanisms when we're under stress and those mechanisms are never working for us. Denial, repression, lashing out, running away from things, ignoring, hyper, responsibility, taking on too much, and then not being able to handle too much. There's a lot on the Adult Children of Alcoholics site about the laundry list, various different behaviors that I know when I read them, I can see in myself that many people who have grown up in a dysfunctional family, or those, who were suffering from addiction and grew out of that family, can identify with those feelings. So as you go through step 10, look at it from very high level perspective and then bring it back down to your daily routine and be honest with yourself. The importance of how to see where your behavior, you might want it to change because it's not been helpful in the past. It's acted as a barrier for you to have true intimacy with those around you. Love, friendship, companionship. When you put up those walls, do you really have that close connection? Or are you just always continually hurting and just suffering through? So I do hope that this episode has been of help to you. Again, we're getting up to very close to the year mark of this podcast, the anniversary. And I ask if, and again, I always feel bad doing this, but I have to be honest. I'm putting out my own money from my day job to be able to pay for the fees for the website, podcast hosting, etc. If you'd like to help, there's ways you can do so. Subscribe to the Substack newsletter that I send out every week. It's $5 a month, $50 a year. And if you can't do that, if you've purchased one of the Let Go and Be Free books, I'd ask that you can do that. That will also help me because the money that comes in from those books, I can put back into the podcast. And if you are struggling now financially, even just giving a like or a review on wherever you're listening to the podcast will be of great help. So thank you. I appreciate when you tune in each week and for continuing to listen. So as always, I wish you well and be well. Thank you.